Hey YouTube, Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Today's video we're adding on to the Weather 101 playlist with the flooding video that I've been trying to do, but there's been a really active storm pattern, a lot of big things going on around the country, so I've been covering that. So as a result, I've kind of had to throw this video a little bit to the wayside. So we're going to just go ahead and jump into it. And for the most part, flooding is pretty self-explanatory, to be honest. I mean, we all know that this comes usually from heavy rain or tropical systems. Occasionally, hurricanes as well. One thing to note, though, because even though it should be pretty self-explanatory, flooding is actually the second deadliest hazard next to heat fatalities. Most people fail to realize the power of water. Pretty much 6 inches of water will knock just about anybody off their feet if it's moving fast, and about 2 feet of water will transport a car. And usually that's how a lot of people end up getting killed in these events, is often through being stuck in a vehicle. So the basics behind flash flooding. Usually slow moving thunderstorms are going to be the culprit, or tropical systems and hurricanes. Flash floods are usually the most dangerous type of flood, and these can also end up causing landslides and destroy buildings and bridges really quickly, as well as roads themselves. They can end up gouging out roads over time. So we can also have these flash floods forming from an ice flow event. It's a little bit more advanced, but at the end it's all the same. That's very common, more so up towards the Dakotas in particular. So simply put, we're going to go ahead and look at the basics with forecasting on this, because that's what this channel is really all about anyway. I don't necessarily make these videos just to talk to you about what flooding is. The main goal here is to actually show you what this looks like ahead of time, so that way you can prepare properly. So flash floods are a little bit more difficult to forecast because they're not always caused by meteorological events, and then also there's other variables that go into it, and it's a little hard to pick up. Trying to pick up storms that are training on radar, not the easiest thing when you're trying to look about 5 days out. So some of the variables, for example, are right here. For example, the speed of the storm system, how high are the rainfall rates, and that's a big one right there, especially. Training echoes, as I've just mentioned, and we'll get into that and show what that looks like in a minute. And also just how much groundwater and surface runoff there is. And also terrain can be a big cause behind that too. A good tool to use for outlooks, if you were to go onto the National Weather Service hazards page, would be the hydrologic outlook. Usually this is done by hydrologists, of course, and these guys study the effects of water on the Earth's surface, atmosphere, etc. And they use their instruments to measure the water levels, particularly over towards the streams, rivers, and lakes, which are also a relevant factor behind a lot of flooding events. I can easily remember back to the Great Flood of Atlanta in North Atlanta in 2009. I remember seeing a boatload of hydrologic outlooks in the days leading up to the main part of the flood, although it had rained for almost a week straight, I think. It even got to the point where I actually ended up staying home one day from school because there was no school. They actually made us not go in, but that's just how bad the flooding was starting to get. Some of the roads, like I remember one little local city around my area actually had pretty much shut down. Like, it was under feet of water. It was crazy. So let that testimony also be an example. Don't take this flooding stuff lightly. It's no joke. So here's an actual look at a weather boundary and storms training over the same area over and over. I want you to pay attention, particularly between Austin and Killeen. These storms are going over the same areas over and over again, and as a result, the rainfall rates in this region are going to be the highest. And notice these little red cores that are within these thunderstorms. Not only is there potential for severe storms, but these storms continually hitting the same areas. Oof. More often than not, you know what that's going to entail. And then also you have to watch these severe weather events every once in a while too, because these will have ridiculous rainfall rates up to about 2 inches an hour, and then right behind that there'll just be that little shield of rain. That can be a big catalyst behind flash flooding as well. And usually how this will end up occurring is we'll usually have a cold front, and sometimes you'll have a section of it that turns into a stationary front, and these storms will end up moving across this corridor, and as a result, we'll end up continually getting the storm after storm after storm, or complex of storm one after the other, and as a result, it just kind of prolongs the grief here, so to speak. We can here's another example of training echoes here, as we're watching, as we can look at the picture here, and you can see based on the arrows where these storms are going. It's literally just like a train, just one after the other, just continually going over the same areas with intense rainfall rates, and this is how we often get flash flooding. And this can also happen over rivers. This can also happen on the coast. And really another example that I'm not really going over too much right now is tropical storms and hurricanes. It's pretty much an obvious type of deal. I mean, we all know how that works, especially if it's a slow moving tropical system. It's pretty much the same practice being applied here. So that being said, when we conclude with all of this, we're mainly going to be looking at these four types of flooding here. I'm not really worried about urban flooding because usually that's more sewer related, not caused as quickly by weather, but it can happen. So we have riverline flooding, which is usually when a river starts to overflow its banks, and it's usually not going to be contained by something like a levee system. It's a little bit more rare, but it can happen. We've had a few great floods in the last decade and a half or so. So there you have it with that. This is another more common version of flooding. It's street flooding. These tend to happen most of our heavy rain events, and you can also get street flooding coinciding with flash flooding. And really, the street flooding in particular, it's more so set apart whenever the water capture system just can't keep up. One thing to note here is they'll often say in the cities that you can have our water gauging systems that can handle up to about 17 inches an hour worth of rainfall, but that's only within the first hour. If it rains longer than that, it drops dramatically up to about maybe half an inch an hour. So these are only designed to last for so long. So whenever you see those flood watches, flood warnings, always keep an eye on them. Most times they can be benign, but every once in a while you can get snuck up on and it can turn into a real problem. And of course, the last one we're going to talk about here is coastal flooding. Coastal flooding typically occurs with big storm systems. We had a pretty good example of that actually over towards the Great Lakes with Winter Storm Elliott. Winter Storm Elliott pushed a lot of not only snow onshore due to the direction of wind, but also it pushed a lot of water onshore as well. So there was a lot of what was called siege flooding, or I think it's pronounced as siege. It's spelled SEICHE, but a lot of that flooding occurred mainly because water was being pushed onshore by Elliott. And usually when we deal with tropical systems as well, it's pretty much the same thing. Just a lot of storm surge, and in a lot of cases will end up pushing water onshore. A lot of waves. So coastal flooding becomes a big deal with that. And then, of course, we already know how flash flooding tends to work. Rainfall falling over the same areas. High rainfall rates and boom, there you go. You get flash flooding occurring very quickly. We're very familiar with that, unfortunately. But anyways, that's the end of this video here. If you guys have been enjoying the Weather 101 playlist, definitely drop me a like. Appreciate that, of course. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm sorry I couldn't get this video out sooner. It's just prioritizing some of the bigger storm systems here. Hope you guys have a happy new year. If you're not watching if you're not watching any other videos before the 31st. But yeah, this has been Metalhead Weatherman. I'll see you guys in the next one. Excuse my alarm.